It was supposed to be a simple evening, just dinner, laughter, maybe a story or two. But that night, my daughter's voice was sharp, her eyes cold. The next thing I knew, she raised her hand. 19 times, each slap louder than the last. I didn't fight back. I didn't scream. I just stood there and counted, not the pain, but the years I had wasted raising her with love. By the time she stopped, I already knew what the next morning would bring. Well, I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. It happened faster than my mind could register, but slow enough for my heart to remember every second. The dinner table was set the same way it always had been. 2 plates, soft light, quiet music in the background. I had spent the afternoon cooking her favorite dish, hoping to make up for the small mistake I'd made. I had forgotten her birthday. It wasn't intentional. The days had blurred together lately, and I had been feeling tired, a little slower. But I thought a warm meal would ease things. I thought love would still count for something. She sat across from me, silent at first, pushing her fork against the edge of her plate. The air felt thick, but I didn't expect what came next. Her chair scraped against the floor, sudden and sharp. She stood up, trembling with anger, her face twisted in something I couldn't recognize. The first slap came before I even looked up. The sound cracked through the room like breaking glass. Then another, and another. I didn't count at first. I just stared at her, at my own child, as her hand kept rising and falling. Somewhere between the 10th and the 15th, I realized I had stopped feeling the pain. My skin burned, but my heart had gone quiet. 19 times. That was the number when she finally stepped back, breathing hard, eyes wet, but not from guilt. Her husband stood by the door, frozen, whispering her name once, then lowering his head. When it ended, there was no shouting, no apology, just silence, the kind that stretches and sticks to the walls. I reached for my teacup. My fingers shook, but I didn't drop it. I took a slow sip, even though my lips were bleeding. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The sound of her breathing was heavy, like someone who had just finished running a race. Maybe she thought she had won something. Maybe she believed she had proved a point. But I sat there, still, watching her walk away, thinking of everything I had done for her since the day she was born. I remembered the long nights when she was sick, and I held her until morning. I remembered her first heartbreak, when she cried for hours, and I stayed awake just to make sure she slept. I remembered birthdays I never missed, every cake baked, every gift wrapped, even when I had no money left for myself. And now all it took was one forgotten day for her to erase all of that. The sound of those slaps didn't echo like anger. They echoed like truth. The truth that love can turn into entitlement, that children can grow proud enough to forget who raised them. Each strike wasn't just her hand. It was a reminder that somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as a burden. When she left the room, her laughter echoed faintly down the hall, sharp and cruel. Her husband followed, silent and small. The front door closed, and I sat alone at the table. My cheek was red, my heart steady. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't pray for understanding. I just sat there and thought. I thought about how easily she had thrown her respect away, how quickly she had forgotten the years that shaped her. I thought about the house she lived in, the one I helped pay for. I thought about the joint accounts, the property papers, and all the things she never cared to read. She might have slapped me 19 times, but she had no idea that the very life she stood on still belonged to me. By the time I finished my tea, my decision was made. There would be no yelling, no confrontation, no scenes. Just quiet steps, steady actions, and a kind of justice that doesn't need noise. I wiped my face, cleaned the broken pieces from the floor, and went to bed. My skin stung, but I slept deeply, because in that silence, I found something stronger than pain. I found clarity. The next morning would be different. I didn't know how yet, but I knew it would be. She had taken my peace for the last time. I wasn't always this quiet woman people see now. There was a time I was full of energy, working 2 jobs, rushing between the school gates and late shifts, trying to keep everything together. My daughter was my reason to keep breathing after her father walked away. I told myself I'd raise her stronger, smarter, kinder. I wanted her to have everything I didn't. So I worked until my bones ached. I skipped meals so she could eat. I wore old shoes so she could have new ones. I called that love. I still do, though now I know love can blind as much as it can build. Every birthday of hers used to be a small celebration of survival. I'd save coins for months to buy a cake, maybe a small gift. We'd laugh over cheap candles and homemade decorations, but she always smiled. That smile made the struggle worth it. I remember thinking, she'll never forget what I did for her. But people do forget, especially when comfort becomes normal, when what was once sacrifice becomes expectation. After I retired, things changed slowly. She started handling the bills, saying it was easier that way. I let her. I thought it was love, her helping me as I once helped her. She took over the house payments, the accounts, even some of my mail. I didn't mind. I was just happy she was there. Every mother dreams of having her child close. What I didn't realize then was that closeness can be control wearing a soft face. Her life became bigger while mine grew smaller. She got married, moved me into the smaller room to make space for guests. I didn't argue. She said it was only temporary. I believed her, like mothers always do. We believe because the alternative, that our own child might not care, is too hard to face. Over the years, I started noticing little things. She spoke to me differently, shorter sentences, sharper tone, as if I were a burden she was forced to carry. When I forgot things, she'd sigh loudly. When I misplaced something, she'd snap. But I told myself she was just stressed, tired, trying to manage too much. That's what mothers always do. We excuse cruelty because we mistake it for pressure. I used to tell people how proud I was of her, how she was independent, confident, successful. But behind those words was a tired truth I didn't want to admit. I was proud of someone who was slowly unlearning how to be kind. There were warning signs long before the slap, like the time she raised her voice in front of neighbors when I dropped a glass, or when she rolled her eyes at me for calling her my little girl. She told me once, half joking, that I was becoming an inconvenience. I laughed along, pretending it didn't hurt. But that word, inconvenience, stayed with me. I had built her world brick by brick, and somehow I had become a wall she wanted to tear down. Every moment of her life had been my effort. The house she lived in, the education she bragged about, even the money she used to decorate her home. I had made her foundation, and she treated it like a burden. The night she slapped me, all those years flashed back in seconds. the meals skipped, the winters without heat, the loneliness of being both mother and father. I didn't just feel anger. I felt a kind of clarity that only pain can bring. Because in that one act, she revealed everything. The truth that she no longer saw me as her mother. Just an old woman she could control. A name she could remove from a paper when the time came. I never wanted to believe my daughter could become cold. But the years of giving had turned into her years of taking. She thought my silence meant weakness. What she didn't know was that silence also remembers everything. Every bill I paid, every paper I signed, every document that still carried my name. When I went to bed that night, my face still sore. I didn't cry. I just kept thinking of one thing: how love can turn into a weapon when only one side keeps giving. And I promised myself, for the first time in my life, that I would stop giving and start protecting what was mine. When the last slap landed, I stood there, still as a wall. My daughter's hand trembled, but her pride didn't. Her chest rose with anger, not regret. Her husband stood by the doorway, helpless, his eyes flickering between us. He whispered something under his breath, something small, something scared. But she only laughed. It wasn't the kind of laugh I remembered from her childhood, not the laugh of joy or playfulness. It was sharp, mocking, as if she had proven something. To her, this was power. To me, it was the moment my child disappeared. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with shame. Not hers, mine. The kind a mother feels when she realizes the person she raised no longer recognizes her. My cheek burned, but my chest hurt more. I looked at her face and saw no trace of the little girl I once held. I saw someone hardened by greed, arrogance, and the idea that age made me disposable. She looked down at me not like a daughter, but like an enemy she had conquered. Her husband finally took her arm and muttered something about calming down. She shrugged him off, picked up her glass of wine, and walked away as if nothing had happened. The sound of her heels clicking down the hallway felt colder than the slap itself. I stood alone, hands shaking, trying to steady myself on the table. My teacup had fallen during the chaos, the liquid spilling across the floor, seeping into the cracks of the wood. I stared at it for a long time. That tiny mess felt like my whole life, poured out and wasted. The house felt louder than ever, even in silence. I could still hear the echo of her voice, the disbelief in her tone, the sheer disgust when she looked at me. All because I forgot one date on a calendar. But it wasn't about the birthday anymore. It hadn't been for years. This was about control, about power, about the idea that I was no longer needed, except as a reminder of the past she wanted to forget. The neighbors must have heard something. I saw a light flicker in the window next door, a curtain move slightly. Shame filled me. Not for what happened, but because I had allowed it to go this far. I had ignored every warning sign, every small disrespect, every time she had spoken to me like I was a burden. I had hoped she would change. But that night, I finally saw the truth. I wasn't waiting for my daughter to change. I was waiting for a stranger to leave my life. When she was a little girl, she used to cry if I so much as raised my voice. She used to hold my hand in crowded markets, saying she never wanted to lose me. I can still hear her saying it. "Don't ever leave me, Mum." That voice used to be my strength. But now, standing in that same house, she had already left me long ago. The woman who stood in her place that night was not my daughter. She was a person shaped by pride, fed by comfort, and blinded by the idea that I would never stand up for myself. I picked up the family photo from the mantelpiece. It was taken years ago, her arm around me, both of us smiling. I stared at it until my hands began to tremble. That photograph used to make me proud. Now it made me sick. I turned it face down and walked away. The glass cracked under my fingers, but I didn't flinch. That was the last time I ever looked at that picture. Her husband came back into the room once she was gone. He looked at me, silent and guilty. He tried to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse. But I raised my hand, and he stopped. There was nothing left to say. Words couldn't fix what had already been broken. He lowered his head and left. The sound of the front door closing was the only mercy that night gave me. I cleaned the floor in silence. I wiped every drop of tea, every shard of glass, every reminder of what had just happened. My body hurt, but my mind was clear. I had lived through too much to let this be the final chapter of my story. That night didn't break me. It revealed what was left of me. The part that still had strength. The part that had learned to endure. And now, finally, the part that was ready to act. I walked to my bedroom, my steps slow but steady. I closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at my hands. They were old, veined, marked by years of work. But they were steady. They could still sign papers. They could still make decisions. And that was the moment I realized. I might not have her respect anymore, but I still had power. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even ask why she did it. I already knew the answer, because she thought she could. That's what years of unreturned kindness do. They teach people that love will never fight back. But I wasn't that kind of mother anymore. I was done being silent, done letting disrespect grow under my roof like mold. I didn't plan revenge with anger. I planned it with reason, quietly, patiently. After washing the blood from my lip, I went to my study. I hadn't touched that desk in months. Dust covered the drawers, and the key to the safe still hung from its hook on the wall. My hands were trembling, but not from pain. From a strange calm I'd never felt before. I unlocked the safe and laid everything out on the table. Property deeds, account statements, insurance papers, and old letters from my lawyer. The house she lived in, the car she drove, the savings she boasted about. All of it was tied to me in some way. She had forgotten that. I hadn't. I sat down and began reading each document line by line. The sound of the clock ticking filled the silence, steady and relentless. It reminded me that every second I stayed quiet, she grew more confident that I'd stay powerless. But I wasn't powerless. I had been the backbone of this family since the day her father died. I built every part of her life with my own hands, and now those same hands were going to take it back. Around midnight, I made tea and sat at the window, staring out at the garden. The moonlight spilled across the lawn, and everything looked still. Peaceful, almost. But my thoughts weren't peaceful. They were sharp. Focused. She thought she had broken me, but she had only woken up the part of me that remembers every sacrifice, every late night, every humiliation I swallowed for her comfort. That part of me had been quiet for too long. I opened a small notebook where I'd written down important contacts over the years. Doctors, lawyers, old friends from my teaching days. My eyes stopped at one name. Mr. Patel, solicitor. He had helped my husband draft the first will. A decent man, sharp but kind. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but I knew he would remember me. I didn't hesitate. I wrote down everything I wanted done in the morning, a list of actions, not feelings. I've learned that lists get things done faster than tears ever will. By the time the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, I had made my decision. The house needed to be protected. My accounts needed to be secured. My will needed rewriting, not out of spite, but clarity. I wouldn't let her control what I had built, and I certainly wouldn't leave her to destroy it. I also needed proof. People like her always deny their actions when the consequences arrive. So I gathered my phone, checked the settings, and realized it had recorded parts of the shouting earlier. Her voice, her words, the sound of the slap. That recording would never see the public eye, but it would live in a safe place where truth couldn't be erased. Before sunrise, I wrote a short letter, not to her, but to my lawyer. It was only one sentence. She struck me 19 times. I need your help securing what's mine. I sealed it in an envelope and placed it beside the documents. Then I made breakfast like I always did. Same cup of tea, same buttered toast. I followed every morning routine perfectly. Because when people think you're fragile, the last thing they expect is calmness. By the time she woke up, I was dressed and ready to leave the house. She passed me in the hallway, half asleep, barely acknowledging me. She didn't know what I had done that night. She didn't even know what I was capable of, and I didn't need her to. Some lessons are learned when the world stops being predictable. I walked out of the house without looking back. The air was cool, the street quiet. I wasn't leaving in defeat. I was walking toward justice, the kind that doesn't need revenge, just correction. My hands didn't shake anymore. My heart didn't ache. I was done being the victim of her moods. That morning, as I stepped into the cab and told the driver the lawyer's address, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the gentle kind, but the solid, unmovable kind that comes after survival. The kind that whispers, "You still have power." The morning after the slaps, I didn't feel weak. I felt strangely clear. There was no anger left in me, only purpose. I had already made my list during the night. Now I was going to act on it. I made myself a cup of tea, sat at the same table where she had humiliated me, and placed the phone beside the teacup. For a moment, I looked at the sunlight falling through the curtains. Bright, sharp, unbothered. It reminded me that life goes on, with or without kindness. I dialed the number I hadn't called in nearly 10 years. When my lawyer's assistant answered, she recognized my name immediately. I didn't waste words. I simply said I needed to execute a few legal transfers, urgently. The assistant didn't ask questions. She knew my tone. Within an hour, the solicitor himself called back. His voice was the same, steady, respectful, serious. I told him everything that needed to be done. Freeze the joint accounts, transfer the property titles fully under my name, and issue a cease access notice for any funds that bore both our signatures. I wanted no delay, no discussion, just action. When I hung up, I didn't feel guilt. I felt balance returning. For years, I had let her manage things for my convenience, as she used to call it. Now it was time to take them back. Every bill, every asset, every key would return where it belonged. My lawyer promised everything would be processed by noon. I trusted him. He'd been with me since the day my husband and I bought this house, the same house she now thought of as hers. Once the call was done, I sat still for a long time. My heart wasn't racing. My hands didn't tremble. I was calm. The kind of calm that follows a storm when everything broken becomes visible. I looked around the kitchen, at the walls I'd painted myself years ago, at the curtains I'd sewn by hand. Everything in that home carried a piece of me. It was mine before it was hers, and it would be mine again. The second call was to the police, not out of anger, but necessity. I told them I wished to file a report of assault, domestic, verbal, and physical. The officer on the line was polite but cautious. He asked if I was in danger. I said no, but I wanted it documented. He told me someone would come by later to take my statement. I agreed and gave my address. When I ended that call, I felt something inside me finally settle. It wasn't revenge. It was justice written down, made official. Real. By mid-morning, I received an email confirming the financial freeze was in motion. Her name had been removed as cosigner. Access cards would be disabled within hours. I read every line twice. Legal words have their own rhythm. Steady, exact, final. It was like listening to reason in written form. I made a printed copy and placed it inside my safe. For years, that safe had only held memories. Now it held proof that I wasn't powerless. I didn't stop there. I called the electricity and property departments, updating every record back to my personal ownership. Quietly, methodically, I removed her fingerprints from my life. The woman who had once said, "You owe me everything," was about to learn that she owned nothing. Around noon, the police came. A young constable and an older officer stepped into the living room. They were gentle. I spoke plainly, without emotion. I described what happened: the shouting, the slaps, the witnesses. I even played them the recording that had captured fragments of her voice. They asked if I wanted to press charges immediately. I said I wanted it logged, not forgotten. They nodded, took notes, and left politely. As the door closed behind them, I exhaled for the first time all morning. Outside, the street was quiet. A few neighbors peeked from their windows. They had seen the officer's car, no doubt already whispering. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them know that silence doesn't mean surrender. That evening I sat in my chair, the same spot where she had stood over me just the night before. The memory of her hand on my face still stung, but it no longer hurt. Pain fades. Shame fades. But action, that stays. I thought of how quickly everything could turn. One call, one document, one legal stamp. I hadn't raised my hand in anger. I had raised it in power through a phone call that cost her everything she took for granted. When the sun went down, I locked my doors, switched off the lights, and whispered to myself, not in bitterness, but in peace. It's done. The next morning began differently. There was no shouting, no footsteps rushing down the hallway, no voice echoing through the house, demanding attention. Only silence. For years, I had longed for peace in this home. I just never thought it would come like this. The air felt lighter, and yet there was a strange weight under it. The kind that comes right before someone realizes what they've lost. I woke early, before sunrise, and made tea like I always did. Habit is hard to break, even when the world around you changes. The steam rose slowly, curling in front of the window. Outside, the street was still. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. I sat at the table and waited, not because I wanted to see her, but because I knew she would come down soon, and I wanted to watch her realize everything had changed. It started small. I heard her slippers drag across the floor. Then, the sound of her phone unlocking. Silence. Again. I could almost picture the confusion on her face. A minute later, I heard her trying again, her tone sharper this time. The phone fell onto the table. Then came the sound of her voice calling her husband, low at first, then louder. The panic was starting to settle in. She didn't know that by now every account she depended on had already been frozen. The joint savings she bragged about, the cards she used, the online payments she made, all inaccessible. Her world had paused, and she didn't even know why yet. Then came the next noise, the sound of keys rattling at the front door. She was trying to step out, probably to clear her head or make a phone call. But the lock had been changed. I had arranged it the day before, right after speaking with the solicitor. One simple visit from a locksmith, and the house she thought she controlled had turned back into mine. The shouting began soon after. Her voice cut through the quiet morning, frustrated, angry, desperate. I didn't move. I sat in my chair and sipped my tea. Each word was a reminder of what she had become: impatient, entitled, hollow. I wasn't cruel, I was calm. Sometimes calmness frightens people more than rage. She stormed into the kitchen eventually. Her eyes were red, hair unkempt, phone still in hand. "Something's wrong with my card," she muttered, more to herself than to me. I looked at her briefly, then turned back to my cup. I didn't say a word. She stood there, waiting for me to react, to comfort, to fix. But I had no comfort left to give. Then, another sound joined. Her husband's car pulling into the driveway. Doors opening, hurried footsteps, and then low voices outside. They were arguing. He must have checked the bank too. The money wasn't there anymore. The accounts were gone. Everything she had counted on was now locked away, safely under my control. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. I could feel the house breathing again, as if it finally recognized who it belonged to. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was intruding in my own home. By noon, the phone rang. It was the bank, calling to confirm the ownership transfer and freeze. I answered calmly, confirming all details. They told me her attempts to withdraw had triggered alerts. I thanked them and hung up. From the other room, I heard her voice breaking now, softer, trembling. Not from guilt yet, but from fear. Fear of losing what she thought was hers. I listened quietly. There's a strange peace in hearing a storm run out of thunder. Later that afternoon, I walked outside for a moment. The sky was gray, clouds rolling in slowly. Across the street, a neighbor looked at me with curious eyes. They must have heard everything. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. People can sense when something has shifted, when power moves from one pair of hands to another. When I came back inside, the house was quiet again. She had locked herself in her room. I sat in the living room, surrounded by silence. But this time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That evening, I received a call from the police officer who had taken my statement. He informed me that the report had been officially filed. I thanked him politely. There was no need for details. The law was now aware of what had happened. That was all I needed. Before I went to bed, I walked past her door. For a brief moment, I stopped. I could hear faint sobs. Maybe regret, maybe panic. I couldn't tell. But I didn't go in. She had made her choice the night she raised her hand. And I had made mine the morning I picked up the phone. As I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I realized something simple. Justice doesn't always come from punishment. Sometimes it comes from the quiet removal of privilege, from watching someone choke on the silence they created. And as I drifted off to sleep, I didn't think about the slaps anymore. I thought about peace, my peace, finally taking shape in the stillness of my own home. When dawn came, I already knew something would feel different. The silence from the night before wasn't normal. It was too deep, too still. The kind that follows after someone realizes they've lost control. I didn't rush to check anything. I just followed my routine, the same as always. Washed my face, made tea, watered the small plant by the window. Normal things, steady things. It's strange how ordinary mornings can hold extraordinary endings. Around 6, I decided to step outside. The air was cold, and a thin mist still clung to the street. I looked toward my daughter's house, just a short walk away. The same one I'd co-signed years ago when she was struggling to get her first mortgage. I hadn't been there since the night she raised her hand. But something about that morning, that unnatural quiet, made me go. As I walked down the path, I noticed the curtains at her front windows were open. The lights inside were still on, bright and wasteful. My chest tightened. It wasn't fear. It was a feeling deeper than that. A strange knowing that something had shifted permanently. When I reached the porch, the front door was half open. That alone told me everything. My daughter was obsessive about locks. She never left a door ajar. I stood still for a long moment, just listening. No footsteps, no voices, no movement at all. Only the faint hum of the fridge from inside. I called her name once, softly. No answer. I took one careful step forward, peered through the doorway. The living room was spotless. Too spotless. The cushions were in place, the rug flattened perfectly, but there was a teacup on the table, half full and cold. A phone charger still plugged in, a candle burning low. It didn't look like someone who had left. It looked like someone who had disappeared mid-thought. I didn't go inside. I just stood there, one hand on the doorknob, staring into that hollow quietness. The air smelled faintly of perfume and burnt wax. The clock on the wall ticked loud, steady, almost mocking. Everything was in its place, except her. My eyes moved to the hallway. 2 coats hung neatly on the rack, shoes still by the door. Her handbag lay open on the chair, with cards and receipts peeking out. It was like she had vanished between one breath and the next. The light from the kitchen cast long shadows across the floor, stretching toward me. For a moment, I thought maybe she had gone out early, maybe to the bank or a friend's house. But then I saw her husband's car parked outside, engine cold. He never walked anywhere. He wasn't the kind of man who left lights on either. That's when I realized. They were both gone. Something heavy sat at the base of my throat, not fear but finality. I didn't need to know where they went. I didn't even want to. I understood enough. People who treat others as possessions eventually find themselves surrounded by emptiness, because that's all they ever created. I stepped back from the door slowly, making sure not to touch anything. I didn't want to disturb that stillness. It wasn't mine to fix. Some messes belong to the people who make them. As I walked away, I looked once more at the house. The lights flickered faintly, the morning breeze moving the curtains just slightly. A home that had once felt loud and proud now looked hollow. A shell. It struck me then how quickly comfort can vanish when it's built on cruelty. By the time I reached my own gate, I felt lighter. Not because I was happy, but because something had finally closed. For years, I carried the burden of trying to keep my child grounded, kind, grateful. I failed at that. But I succeeded in one thing, reminding her, even in absence, that no one is untouchable. I went back inside my home, placed the kettle on, and sat by the window again. The steam rose quietly, soft and white, against the morning light. My hands were steady. I didn't look toward her house again. Some stories end without words. Some lessons echo louder in silence than any scream could. That morning, as the sun finally broke through the mist, I realized something simple. Peace doesn't always come from forgiveness. Sometimes it comes from knowing you don't need to chase closure. You just let the silence speak for itself. The story spread faster than I expected. It began with whispers in the neighborhood, the kind that start as curiosity and end as judgment. People who had once praised my daughter's success now spoke in low tones when her name was mentioned. They had heard about the police report, about the frozen accounts, about the legal notice pinned to her front gate. Every small detail traveled like smoke through a small town, faint but impossible to ignore. My daughter had always cared about appearances, about being admired and envied. But admiration fades quickly when truth steps forward. I didn't tell anyone what had happened in full. I didn't need to. The law spoke louder than any mother could. Her co-workers stopped visiting, her husband's friends distanced themselves, and soon her once lively social circle became quiet. She had built her reputation on perfection, on being the daughter who had made it, the woman who lived in a fine house and spoke of discipline and respect. But now people saw through the mask. Behind her charm was temper. Behind her success was cruelty. The house that once held her pride now looked abandoned, though the lights stayed on for days after she disappeared. The neighbors said they saw her husband leave with a single bag and her car still parked outside. Someone else said she had gone to stay with a friend. Others believed she simply ran from shame. I didn't ask. Some disappearances don't need searching. When the bank called to confirm the legal freeze, they spoke to me with sympathy. They had seen too many cases like this. Parents taken advantage of. Families torn apart by entitlement. They didn't need to know about the 19 slaps. I just said, "It's settled now," and hung up. I didn't want pity. I wanted peace. The headlines never carried our names. It wasn't a big scandal, just a quiet story told between neighbors. Did you hear what happened to her daughter? That was enough. I had once feared the world's opinion. Now I realized the world moves on quickly, but the people who hurt you remember longer. My daughter, the one who once scolded me for being forgetful, was now the one no one wanted to remember. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. I didn't. What I felt was release. She had struck me 19 times, but the ache that stayed wasn't on my skin. It was in my heart. A mother never truly hates her child. She just stops expecting them to act like one. I didn't wish her harm. I only wished she would look in the mirror and see what she had become. The following week, I received a letter from her lawyer asking for negotiation. She wanted to resolve matters privately. I tore the envelope before finishing the first line. Some things can't be rewritten in legal language. She had already written her apology on my face, and the bruises had faded, but the memory didn't. I went back to my routine. Simple meals, quiet mornings, and an evening walk by the garden fence. Neighbors nodded politely, unsure whether to offer sympathy or distance. I preferred the silence. The peace of knowing I had done what was necessary was enough. The house felt different now, not because it was larger or quieter, but because it was mine again, fully and legally. The locks clicked softly each night, and for the first time in years I slept without fear of raised voices. People sometimes ask if I miss her. I think about the girl I once knew, the child who used to run to me after school with drawings and stories. That version of her I miss. But the woman who stood over me, hand raised, face full of hate. She's someone I never knew. Maybe one day she'll find her way back, but she'll have to knock this time, and I'll decide whether to open the door. In the end, the world didn't punish her. Her own actions did. Reputation can be rebuilt, but respect cannot. She lost both in one night. The empty house she left behind stood as a reminder that cruelty builds no home. I didn't destroy her life. I just stopped protecting her from the consequences of her own. And that, I learned, is what real justice feels like. Not loud, not vengeful, but steady. Like a mother cleaning the last trace of a storm from her floor, knowing the sky is finally clear. The house had always been full of noise. Her laughter, her shouting, the television blaring from morning to night. But after she left, silence returned like an old friend. I woke up the next morning to stillness. Sunlight spilling through clean windows and no tension hanging in the air. It felt like the house itself could finally breathe again. For years, I had lived there as if walking on eggshells, afraid of her moods, afraid of what would happen next. Now, every room was my own again. Every sound was natural. The kettle boiling, the floor creaking, the gentle rhythm of peace. I didn't rebuild my life through anger. I rebuilt it through purpose. The first thing I did was call my lawyer and finalize the sale of my share of her property. I didn't want anything connected to her anymore. The money was more than I needed, so I decided to turn some of it into something good. I donated a large portion to a women's shelter in town. I told them it was for mothers who had nowhere safe to go. The woman at the desk thanked me, but I didn't explain further. Some stories don't need to be told. They just need to be turned into action. With what I kept, I rented a small cottage by the coast. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. It had one bedroom, a small garden, and a wooden porch facing the sea. The first night there, I sat on the steps with a blanket around my shoulders and listened to the waves. It felt like freedom had a sound, calm, constant, and untouchable. I made tea, read a book, and slept without locking my door twice. That was how I knew I was safe again. The mornings were gentle. I would open the windows, let the sea breeze in, and make breakfast without waiting for someone to shout from another room. No footsteps, no slammed doors, just the soft hum of peace. I started writing again, not letters to anyone, just thoughts on paper. It became my quiet way of healing. I wrote about the woman I used to be, the one who believed that patience could fix everything. Then I wrote about the woman I had become, the one who finally learned that strength isn't silence, it's boundaries. Sometimes, when I walked through the village market, I saw families together, mothers, daughters, sons, and a part of me would ache. I still missed her, not the cruel part, but the little girl who used to hold my hand. I wondered if that version of her still existed somewhere, buried under pride and anger. Maybe one day she'd come back different, but I didn't wait for it. I had learned that waiting for someone to change only keeps you trapped in their storm. I kept one photo of her, taken when she was 10 years old, smiling beside a cake I had baked. That picture sat on my bedside table. I looked at it sometimes, not with bitterness, but with acceptance. That little girl didn't know what she'd become, and maybe that wasn't her fault. Life hardens people in ways we don't always see coming. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I could forgive the child she once was, not the woman who thought cruelty was power. Months passed, and peace became my habit. I started volunteering at a local community center, teaching basic literacy to older women who never had the chance to study. They told me their stories of loss, struggle, and rebuilding. Listening to them reminded me that I wasn't alone. Pain ages differently in everyone, but it always carries lessons if you look closely enough. I never spoke about my daughter there. I let them think I was just a retired teacher who moved for the sea air. In truth, I had moved for survival. Emotional survival. My laughter returned slowly. The lines on my face softened. The world started feeling kind again. Every evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, I'd sit outside with a cup of tea and watch the light fade. I didn't think about the slaps anymore. I thought about how far I'd come from them. I thought about the quiet power of a mother who refused to stay broken. The house I left behind was now just an address. The home I found was peace, built not from walls, but from the decision to never accept disrespect again. My story didn't end with revenge. It ended with clarity. That's what healing looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-respect. And in that little cottage by the sea, surrounded by silence, I finally remembered what it felt like to live without fear. I often sit on the porch now, a cup of tea in my hand, watching the waves roll in and out. It's strange how quiet life becomes once you stop trying to be understood. The sea doesn't ask questions. It just listens, endlessly, patiently. That's what peace feels like. Not joy, not triumph. Just the absence of noise that once drained you. When I think back to that night, 19 slaps, each heavier than the last, I don't see anger anymore. I see clarity. Each strike removed a layer of illusion. I had spent my whole life believing that love could cure anything, that motherhood meant forgiveness without limit. But pain has a way of teaching lessons that kindness never could. She thought she was punishing me for forgetting her birthday. But what she really did was remind me that I had forgotten myself. The bruises faded, but they left something stronger behind. Awareness. Awareness that being a mother doesn't mean being a victim, that survival sometimes requires silence and sometimes requires action. The morning after the assault, when I made that phone call to my lawyer, I wasn't acting out of vengeance. I was acting out of dignity. I had lived long enough to know that some people only learn when consequences knock. My daughter was one of them. I never expected things to unfold the way they did. I didn't expect her to leave, to abandon the home we had built together. But when I found her house standing empty, lights still on, I understood something deeper. Shame can be heavier than guilt. Guilt makes you apologize. Shame makes you disappear. Maybe that's why she ran. Maybe she couldn't face the reflection of what she'd done. In the quiet days that followed, I found myself rewriting my understanding of motherhood. It isn't about enduring everything for your children. It's about teaching them, even through pain, that respect is not negotiable. I used to believe that protecting her from the world was my job. Now I see that protecting myself from her was necessary. The same strength that once built her life had to rebuild mine. Sometimes people ask me if I'd take her back. My answer changes depending on the day. Some mornings I think yes. Every mother wants her child near. Other days, when the memory resurfaces like a shadow, I know I couldn't. Love doesn't always require presence. Sometimes love is just letting go without bitterness. I don't hate her. I don't even resent her. I just don't recognize her anymore. And maybe that's how it's meant to be. I think about the woman I was before. Soft-spoken, patient, always trying to keep peace at any cost. That woman would have apologized for forgetting the birthday. She would have said sorry, even while bleeding. The woman I became afterward would never. That's growth, even if it came the hard way. We don't choose the lessons life gives us, but we can choose how they end. The cottage I live in now is small but strong, much like me. Each morning, I open the windows and breathe in salt air instead of fear. I water my plants, talk to the seagulls, and read books I never had time for. My life isn't grand, but it's honest. And honesty feels better than comfort ever did. I no longer walk on eggshells, no longer wonder when the next insult might come. The quiet feels earned. One day, I imagine she might come back. Maybe years from now, older, calmer, ready to apologize. If she does, I'll listen, but I won't forget. Forgiveness isn't the same as invitation. I'll offer her tea, not my trust. Trust, once broken, is not rebuilt with tears. It's rebuilt with time, and time takes patience I no longer owe her. When I close my eyes at night, I sometimes still hear the echo of her voice. Harsh, angry, young. But it doesn't hurt anymore. It only reminds me how far I've come. The pain that once defined me now only shapes me. If you're listening to my story, I want you to remember one thing. Love without respect is not love. It's control. And no matter how late in life it happens, you always have the right to take back your peace. She slapped me 19 times for forgetting one day. I remembered the law, and it remembered me. I didn't ruin her life. I simply stopped letting her ruin mine. And that's how a mother survives.